I thought I was seeing things. I watched it twice just to make sure. Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, said that Nvidia's market share in China has dropped from 95% to 0%. You heard that right, 0. Can you handle that? That means Nvidia has completely pulled out of the Chinese market. It's all about domestic substitution now.
A Chinese blogger shouted, "Domestic substitution." Below, some Chinese netizens commented, "Do you think domestic products are free? You're making it sound like domestic substitution is cheap. Good news, domestic substitution. Bad news, domestic substitution." For users, from now on, they'll only be able to buy expensive, crappy products. At a recent event in the U.S. hosted by Castle Securities, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang directly addressed Nvidia's difficulties in the Chinese market, particularly in the context of U.S China tech tensions.
At the moment, we are 100% out of China. And so China is 0% of, we went from 95% market share to 0%. And so I can't imagine any policymaker thinking that that's a good idea. That whatever policy we implemented caused America to lose one of the largest markets in the world to 0%.
One netizen said, "What's Huang complaining about? Soybeans are already at 0. Will Boeing be next?" Now this is real choke point pressure. Another said, "We should have never sold to communist China." In recent years, Nvidia's market share in China has fallen rapidly. On May 21st, Huang also said that 4 years ago, Nvidia's market share in China was 95%. Now it's only down to 50%. In fact, after Jensen Huang finally convinced President Trump to approve the sale of a downgraded version of Nvidia's AI chips to China, Chinese authorities issued a directive saying U.S. chips are unsafe, outdated, and not environmentally friendly. They refused to purchase any more American AI chips. The Chinese government also claimed that Nvidia had violated anti-monopoly laws and promised to investigate further. On Chinese social media platforms, many bloggers began discussing how to find alternatives after Nvidia's exit and how the market share would be divided. Blogger Lao Lin said, "When Huang directly said Nvidia would leave the Chinese market, that's not something small."
You have to know that the Chinese market used to contribute nearly 30% of Nvidia's revenue, which is like selling $3.5 billion worth of chips every month. Now, with Nvidia pulling out, there's this huge gap in the market. Whether it's AI companies, gamers, or car manufacturers, everyone's wondering where to find domestic alternatives for chips in the future. First, let's break it down. Nvidia's business in China relies on 4 main sectors, and these 4 are like its 4 legs. Losing any one of them would be a major problem. The first sector is AI training chips, like the H100 and A100. Companies like Baidu and Alibaba that work on large models used to rely entirely on Nvidia to train their models. This sector accounted for 45% of Nvidia's revenue in China, and now they are urgently looking for alternatives. The second sector is data center interference chips, like the RTX 6000D. When we use food delivery apps or watch short videos, the servers behind them are packed with these chips. A single server can hold thousands of them. The third sector is consumer graphics cards, like the RTX 40 series. Whether it's gamers or design studios, 6 out of 10 people use these cards. The fourth sector is embedded chips for smart driving in cars and robots and factories. About 20% of these devices use Nvidia's chips. Now, all 4 of these gaps will need to be filled by domestic manufacturers.
The blogger analyzed that the most urgent need is for AI training chips, and 2 domestic manufacturers may be able to step in. The first is Huawei's Ascend, with the 910B chip already reaching its limits. Its computing power is weaker than Nvidia's H100, only reaching 60 to 80% of the H100's performance, but the price is less than half. However, if you want to connect thousands of chips together, the speed doesn't match Nvidia's. The second option is BREN Technology's BR100 chip, which uses a technology called chiplet. ByteDance has already used it to train video recommendation models and reported that it's slower than the H100 for a single task. Plus, it's still in the early stages of mass production, so its capacity can't keep up, and buyers will have to wait for more stock. The second major sector is data center inference chips. The main player here is Micron, with the latest chip offering 256 TOPS of computing power. The third sector is consumer graphics cards, where More Threads is a competitor. Its MTT S80 card targets Nvidia's RTX 4070. For gaming and 3D design, the MTT S80 can reach 75% of its Nvidia competitor at just 30% of the price. The fourth sector is embedded chips, where domestic manufacturers have completely taken over. 3 companies might be able to fill the gap. The first is Haiguang Information. The second is Jingjia Micro, which originally made military GPUs and later applied the stability of military components to civilian embedded chips. The third is Tianshu Zhixing, whose Kunlun series chips can reach 295 TOPS in INT performance. Some automotive component manufacturers are already using it to replace Nvidia's embedded chips. However, the blogger points out that Nvidia's CUDA ecosystem is like an operating system that's been in use for 15 years, and everyone is used to it. Chinese chips need time to develop a whole new ecosystem. An overseas expert commented that the main issue with domestic chips is that their technical performance and cost-effectiveness are still lacking, limiting their ability to replace Nvidia effectively. Over the years, the government has pushed for nationwide projects to expand production capacity, which has increased competition within companies and led to project failures. A netizen said, right now, the alternatives are downgraded alternatives, benefiting second-hand cards and smuggled cards. Since the mid-1910s, the Chinese government has long claimed that it wants to achieve technological independence. However, it has been accused of forcing foreign companies to transfer key technologies to China, or blatantly stealing advanced Western technology. Although the government has invested billions of dollars over the years to support wafer fabs and the semiconductor industry, the technology still lags behind the West, making it difficult to establish a complete and independent AI supply chain. Nvidia has been providing high-performance GPUs paired with a stable and multifunctional CUDA software ecosystem for over 10 years. Major Chinese AI companies, including Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, and DeepSeek, all rely on Nvidia's hardware and software. While Alibaba and Baidu have also developed their own AI processors, they still purchase large amounts of Nvidia's H20. According to semiconductor research firm SemiAnalysis, Nvidia produced about 1 million HGX H20 chips last year, nearly all of which were purchased by China. SemiAnalysis also released a report pointing out that Huawei's AI processor, the Ascend 910C, actually uses TSMC's 7nm chips, despite its claim to be made in China. The Ascend 910B also uses TSMC chips, with China's SMIC only being a nominal partner. Leonard Heim, a researcher for the American think tank RAND, stated that in 2024, Huawei used illegal means to obtain about 3 million chips from TSMC to produce around 1.4 to 1.5 million Ascend 910C chips. This number is close to the supply Nvidia provides to China. David Sachs, the White House AI lead, pointed out on October 14th that the Chinese government has made it clear that they no longer want U.S. chips. China's current strategy is to fully support Huawei, allowing it to compete with the U.S. on the international stage. However, in a recent episode of the China Talk podcast, Chris McGuire, who served as the Deputy Senior Director for Technology and National Security Affairs on the National Security Council, under the Biden administration, discussed how Huawei is not only failing to surpass Nvidia, but the gap will continue to grow. McGuire said that China will not be able to produce chips comparable to Nvidia's H100 until the end of 2027, and by that time, they will be 5 years behind. According to roadmaps published by Nvidia and Huawei, over the next 2 years, the performance gap between Nvidia and Huawei chips will widen by 6 to 7 times. If this happens, Huawei will need to increase its chip production by 60 to 70 times to reach Nvidia's overall computing power. He explained that Nvidia will produce 7 to 8 million chips by 2027. This means that Huawei would need to produce about 200 million chips in 2027 to match Nvidia's level. Assuming Huawei chip yield is 30%, this means they would need 11 million wafers. TSMC's annual total output is 17 million wafers, which means Huawei would have to use most of TSMC's annual output for its Ascend project. He concluded that this is almost impossible. McGuire also mentioned that Huawei will only be able to produce 600,000 Ascend chips next year, a very low number. Moreover, we know that many of these chips are illegally smuggled in after being produced by TSMC. DeepSeek's R1 model was trained using 50,000 NVIDIA Hopper series GPUs, including 30,000 HGX 820s, 10,000 H800s and 10,000 H100s. Their software platform heavily relies on CUDA. When DeepSeek was developing its R2 model, despite the Chinese government's push to switch to Huawei's Ascend 910, they ultimately decided to stick with Nvidia's GPUs. Nvidia's GPUs have better performance stability, so they would use Ascend only in the inference stage. In terms of hardware, China still cannot produce AI chips with advanced processes that are comparable to those from AMD or Nvidia. All of China's leading AI chip companies, including Huawei, Biren, and More Threads, are on the U.S. Department of Commerce's entity list, meaning they cannot use TSMC's advanced processes. These companies can only rely on China's SMIC, but SMIC's technology is still behind. Although SMIC claims to be able to produce 7nm chips and plans to advance to 6nm and 5nm processes, production capacity and yield remain uncertain. Moreover, even if China could supply a large number of Ascend or Biren GPUs, developers would still be unlikely to choose these processors if the software platform is not mature. The failure of DeepSeek's R2 training is the best example of this. Under U.S. export controls, Nvidia's chips have been heavily used in China, raising suspicions about their illegal transfer. Recently, media reports have revealed that a mysterious Asian woman close to Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang may have been using a company called Megaspeed in Singapore to purchase large quantities of Nvidia chips and then divert them to China to bypass U.S. export controls. Both the U.S. Department of Commerce and Singaporean authorities have launched a joint investigation into the company. However, Nvidia has responded, saying that the company complies with relevant laws and no evidence of diversion has been found. According to reports, a woman named Alice Huang attended a party in Taipei last year with Jensen Huang, sitting next to him. Alice Huang, whose Chinese name is Huang Le, was the former managing director of Megaspeed, a company she has since left. Megaspeed was established in 2023 as an overseas business branch of the Chinese gaming and cloud computing company 7th Avenue, which is based in Singapore. It was later spun off and rebranded as Megaspeed. Shareholders of 7th Avenue include both the Chinese Communist Party and local governments. Before joining Megaspeed, Alice Huang was an executive director at a Shanghai-based fund, which had invested in 7th Avenue and had connections to multiple state-owned enterprises. In 2023, Megaspeed established a subsidiary in Malaysia and rapidly procured nearly $2 billion worth of Nvidia's high-end chips, most of which were purchased through the U.S. subsidiary of the Inspur Group, which had previously been sanctioned by the U.S. for providing technology to the Chinese military. These chips were sent to data centers in Malaysia and Indonesia, suspected of being used to provide remote services for Chinese companies. This would violate U.S. law, and the investigation is ongoing. Nvidia has argued that they view Megaspeed as a Singaporean company, which passed regulatory review, and they have found no evidence of chip diversion. In February, Singaporean authorities arrested 9 suspects, including executives from Chinese tech companies, accusing them of providing misleading statements regarding the whereabouts of AI chip servers. Earlier, Jensen Huang, in an effort to demonstrate Nvidia's commitment to the Chinese market, visited China 3 times this year. During a visit last year, he removed his signature black leather jacket, donned a northeastern-style floral vest, and sang traditional Chinese folk songs. This year, he even wore traditional Chinese clothing and praised China's technological progress in Chinese. However, despite these gestures, the Chinese Communist Party did not reciprocate respect. Instead, they viewed him as easy to manipulate, believing they could demand whatever they wanted. China expert Wang He pointed out that Nvidia became the first company in history to surpass a market value of $4 trillion in July this year. For Nvidia, the Chinese market is not indispensable. What's more important is that the Chinese Communist Party's ultimate goal is to develop and use domestically produced chips. Any overly high expectations for the Chinese market are nothing more than fantasy. In contrast, when Trump returned to the presidency, he introduced the Make America Great Again campaign, which emphasized the return of manufacturing and domestic production to restore America's economic strength and industrial brilliance. With Nvidia losing the Chinese market, the company is now intensifying its efforts to establish itself in the U.S. and is collaborating with Taiwanese company TSMC. On October 17th, Nvidia announced that it had officially received the first Blackwell wafer produced by TSMC at its Arizona facility. This marks the first time chips have been fully manufactured on U.S. soil. The early mass production at TSMC's Arizona facility also represents a tangible outcome of the U.S.-Taiwan semiconductor alliance. Jensen Huang said, "This is a historic moment for several reasons. It's the very first time in recent American history that the single most important chip is being manufactured here in the United States by the most advanced fab, by TSMC." Huang added that this not only symbolizes a new phase in Nvidia's partnership with TSMC, but also represents the realization of America's vision for reindustrialization. This move aligns with President Trump's policy of strengthening the U.S.'s leadership in technology and manufacturing. In addition to Nvidia, U.S. memory chip giant Micron Technology is another example of a company shifting away from the U.S. China tech rivalry. Two sources told Reuters that Micron has recently decided to stop supplying server chips to data centers in mainland China. Amid the intensifying U.S. China tech competition, the company is making a significant strategic pivot. This decision directly follows a 2023 ban imposed by Chinese authorities on Micron, citing national security risks. Micron's server chip business has not recovered. Micron has also been scaling down its other operations in China. According to the South China Morning Post, the company laid off hundreds of employees in its universal flash storage project in August. Analysts pointed out that Micron is now using the explosive global demand for memory in generative AI to actively shift resources and focus away from the restricted Chinese market. With Micron's exit, there are voices within China claiming this is an opportunity for domestic alternatives, such as Yangtze Memory Technologies and Changxin Memory Technologies. However, experts believe that China's domestic memory chips are still a long way from replacing Micron. Before 2017, China had no ability to produce memory chips and relied entirely on imports. In recent years, two major domestic companies have focused on memory chips. YMTC is targeting NAND flash memory, while CXMT focuses on DRAM. However, by the fourth quarter of 2024, global DRAM market data shows that Samsung, SK hynix, and Micron control 94.6% of the global market share, with these three companies still growing quarter by quarter. In contrast, Chinese domestic manufacturers are grouped under others, with only about 4.3% of the market share. China's domestic memory chips are facing numerous challenges, including the impact of U.S. sanctions, technological bottlenecks, financial pressures, and legal disputes. Since the end of 2022, YMTC has been placed on the U.S. Entity List, which prohibits it from purchasing U.S. equipment and technology without a license. This has left the company unable to obtain advanced chip manufacturing tools, such as etching machines and deposition equipment. They're forced to rely on outdated machinery, severely hindering their production capacity expansion and technological advancement. Additionally, factory construction has stalled. YMTC and CXMT's new plant projects have been delayed or paused due to a shortage of equipment. Although Beijing is pushing for a completely domestic production line, the domestic equipment is not yet mature enough, making it difficult to fully replace foreign machinery in the short term. Recently, the global memory chip market has experienced a new round of price hikes, with major manufacturers like Samsung, Micron, and SK hynix collectively raising their product prices. DRAM and NAND flash prices have surged by over 200% within 6 months, with some high-end products facing severe shortages. On June 12, 2025, Micron Technology announced that it would add another $200 billion in investment to expand its chip manufacturing and R&D in the United States. This marks another achievement of the Trump administration's efforts to bring the chip industry back to the U.S. With Trump's return to power, the U.S. China tech decoupling is intensifying, and American companies continue to scale back their operations in China. In July, Amazon Web Services announced that it would close its AI Research Institute in Shanghai, marking the company's last overseas AI lab. The U.S. and China are still engaged in trade talks, with analysts suggesting that the purpose is to control the damage rather than reset strategically. The competitive dynamics between the U.S. and China remain unchanged, and further cooperation between the two sides seems unlikely. The tactical de-escalation and reconciliation may occur, but the strategic trend of decoupling, especially in high-tech sectors such as semiconductors, is undeniable. Since the U.S.-China trade war, the Chinese government has consistently used rare earths as a bargaining chip, attempting to gain the upper hand in trade negotiations. Chris McGuire stated that the U.S. holds the power to escalate sanctions. Imposing large-scale export controls on Chinese companies or cutting off the dollar accounts of Chinese banks would be extremely painful for them. He speculated about how long Chinese EV maker BYD would survive without U.S. technology or TSMC's chips. Many of these vehicles rely on 4nm chips to run their advanced driver assistance systems. While BYD has localized most of its supply chain, the only aspect it has yet to localize is advanced chips.